What an interesting week it's been for me. We'll start off with this. There was a preacher who once got in front of the congregation, and she said, I'm going to start this series off about enemies, and I just got to be honest, I have enemies. And she said, I'm sure some of us have enemies. Just with a show of hands, she said, how many of you have had or have now probably somebody you'd consider an enemy? And a bunch of the hands went up. And she said, thank you. And then she said, well, how many of you would maybe just a dozen, a handful, less than 10 enemies, maybe just a handful. How many? And a few more hands went up, and this even just one or two, and a few more hands went up, and then she kind of smiled and she said, yeah, I think it's pretty true. We all experience this kind of reality where we have enemies in our, and she was interrupted because an older gentleman stood up in the back, a very much older gentleman, and he raised his hand, and she said, yes, sir. And the man said, Pastor, I don't have one enemy. And she said, really? Nope, haven't had one enemy at all. And she said, can you come on up here? I want to know who you are. And he came on up there. He was probably, I think he was about 98 years old, she thought. And as he came up next to her, she said, that's amazing. She said, so how is that possible? You don't have one enemy. She said, nope, no, ma'am. All those idiots died. It's interesting because this last week after I finished my sermon, and admittedly it's been kind of an awkward series as we talk about this, it sounds almost facetious. How do we save the world? Like we could actually do such a thing, or we could participate in such a thing. And yet I drew off text from Micah, the three things that God requires, the only three things that God requires, justice, mercy, and humility, and talked about how those are elements of connection. I looked at Jesus' teachings. We looked at Paul and the ancient Galatians creed, which is older than the church creed that was adopted finally in the 4th and 5th century, and that one about how there's no Greek or Jew, there's no male or female, there's no free or slave, everyone is one. This idea that we all share in the same origin. We are all one together. And now how do we do that? And then we looked at Martin Luther King, and I'll look a little bit more at something he said as well. But all of these kinds of ideas seem to speak to the same thing. How do we save the world? And so I ended up finishing last week's by saying, we are all a part of this diverse world, but we're all one, and we have to learn how to let them in to our lives, those others, those different, those ones with whom we disagree, or the ones even we find. And then I said, in fact, I'd like to have a meal with my enemy. And who wants to join me? Right? And then I got all these emails all week, and I saw these Facebook postings, and it was like one email would say, I wouldn't mind having dinner with my enemies because I'd like those idiots to explain why they think the way they think. Really, why are they so mad at me? And then I had some other responses that were saying like, I think maybe that kind of wasn't such a powerful thing. You could say that more powerfully perhaps. And then someone would email me and say, that was the most powerful and convicting thing I've heard, and now how do I join in? And I got every sort of response, right? And then I even got responses on Facebook that said, before you go spouting off talking to your enemy, maybe your church ought to include everybody regardless of their sexual orientation. I was like, have you been to 1111? But they were talking about the Methodist denomination. I get it, and they're just that's where people are. They're all angry, right? We're all hurt. We're all angry. We're all defensive. And it was amazing to see this response. And so I guess I'm doing something right because as my friend Elizabeth Ellis, the storyteller, whom some of y'all know over in Dallas, would always say, if you didn't piss off some of the folks in your crowd, you didn't do your job. It's not about settling and thinking, this was nice and I feel better now, and so it was a good day. I'm going home now. This is practice. This is being with Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid. We're learning wax on, wax off. And it's the same thing over and over. We do the kairos because that's helpful in real life. When you find yourself with somebody and you're at this point of encounter, This past week, I had this wonderful opportunity, or a week or two ago, to sit down with this couple, and we were sitting down and visiting, and we found out we had some similar things in common, and we were having this great conversation. Hadn't met before, and we were just enjoying the conversation, when all of a sudden, they found out we're ministers, and they said, and we said, we're Methodists, and they said, well, we're Baptists, and I said, oh, okay, and she says, yeah, your church has fallen apart. And I said, really? And they said, yeah, if it weren't for the fact that, the Bible says those people don't belong. And I was kind of like, well, which people? You? I don't know. What are we talking about? I didn't say that. I said, I didn't say anything. I just kind of waited. I said, And she said, well, it's the church. The church has just gotten liberal, and it's just losing its footing. And it's just, it was kind of like what the guy was saying in there, just women are men, and men are meant to be together. And now, it felt confrontive, right? We've all been in some of these scenarios. And I immediately felt the cortisol in my body because I'm sensitive to that now. And I felt the back of my neck getting a little tense, the base of my spine going, run, or fight. And instead, I thought, take a deep breath, and let's see if we can dance. Because Aikido, I took Aikido for a couple of years, and one of the things that Aikido says that I think is amazing is Aikido says you don't attack your opponent, you dance with your opponent. You move with the energy, because energy's energy. It's all part of the same energy. They don't know it, they think they got all of it. If you go fighting against it, you're going to lose, or maybe you'll win, but it's beside the point because you've just denied the reality. And the reality is we all share in it. Like I said, step one for us is accept our acceptance. We are all a part of the origin story. Whether that origin story for you is the Creator, you're created in the image of God, the imago Dei, whether you see yourself as that, whether you're a secular materialist, and you're a scientist and don't know what you think about God or faith, we're still part of the origin story. We're still part of the evolving creation. We all are. To think otherwise is not just arrogant, it's kind of foolish. But a lot of us do. A lot of us do think that. And that's the hardest thing. If we accept our acceptance, what does that mean? It means we got to accept everybody else's acceptance too. That's step one. We all share in this origin. And then I said step two was that, maybe we're the baddies. Some of you remember the video I showed. Maybe we're the baddies here. Maybe we're the ones that are preventing the next step forward. The bumper sticker I took around and showed all over the airport, and all the different people had the same response to beware the dangers of stupid people in large groups. They all had the same response. Yeah, that's the truth. Isn't that the truth? And it doesn't matter socioeconomic status. Wherever you were, they were all saying the same. I'm thinking like we're all stupid. Right? We have to accept. That's step two. Step two is we have to be willing to do some self-examination. And I know how hard that is because I know I'm right. I know it. I know it. But that's the only way to dance, people. So the third one, which was the hard one, was this idea of let everybody in and how hard that was. How hard this idea is to open the doors to those people who we're opposed to, or they're opposed to us, or we find ourselves at odds with how they think, or they with us. And so I want to suggest a couple of things quickly as we get to this last step. Let's see, I'm going to move on ahead here. So step 4. I called it building a bridge. I don't remember what I called it in the paper, in the bulletin, but it's essentially building a bridge with curiosity, or building a curious bridge. So assume that we've successfully accomplished steps 1 through 3. But I'm going to say, like Mr. Miyagi, you got to go back and you got to wax that stupid car again, because you still haven't gotten the very basics down. It's just you got to get that simple stuff down. You got to get it in your brain. You got to, if you have to do loving kindness meditations 4 times a day and wish the best for the people that you don't like, you've got to do it until you begin to break down your own walls to love. What is it the Rumi says? Don't seek so much for love, but seek to break down the barriers that you have to it, because we're all part of it. A lot of people got barriers to it. How can we dance with them in a way that opens up their understanding too? And by the way, I am not saying you have to give up your convictions. I love that. I got several emails that said, I'm not giving up my convictions. I know you're not. I know that. And I don't expect you to. That's not what this is about. You see injustice, you fight against it. You see someone suffering under the oppression of someone else, we're called to deal with that. You see somebody you're in a situation where you're experiencing it yourself. I'm not saying you need to sit down and kiss somebody who's, mean-spirited. You don't even have to hug them. Probably shouldn't hug them. But that's not what this is about. This is about who we are and how we see the world. Because that will change everything if we change how we see the world. So 3 things I want to say to you about how you do that. Say you got those first 3 steps out of the way, and now you're ready to build the bridge. And this has been weird for me, people, because this whole bridge image was the fact that I feel like I'm building it as I'm walking across it. And I can tell you the truth. You can ask my wife. There have been nights where I wake up in the middle of the night going, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. This is so impossible. This is so ridiculous. Why would I even think this, that we could possibly do this? Maybe I got this all wrong. I have been so reflectively in conflict about this thing. So I'm building this bridge with you. But here's some things I think about, because I've experienced this and so have you. When you meet someone, 3 things happen. The first thing that I think we do as people of faith is we recognize that the space between us, the space between you and me, is that out beyond ideas space, is that sacred space. What Martin Buber said, that's where God's waiting, in that space between us. Not in your stance, not in their stance. A friend of mine, when I was having lunch with him a couple weeks ago and I was telling him about this, he said, there's somebody who said, if you ever draw a line, God's always going to be on the other side. If you ever draw a line, God's always going to be on this side because you've missed the point by drawing the line. The space between is where it happens. If you're willing to go there, if you're willing to get to the space between, to be at that place where we experience God, a couple of things have to happen. You can't take all of your baggage into that space. So you got the space between, then you got the bridge. A lot of stuff has to happen on that bridge. And then you have what some people call the encounter, but I'm calling the dance, because it's not really that pretty when you have those encounters at first. Like I said, with this couple that I met, that experience it's awkward, and the cortisol starts to race through the body, and the automatic nervous system kicks in, and you're doing things out of rote and out of just repetitive patterns, or out of your culture or your echo chambers or wherever you're from, and you're not really present. So we got to do stuff on that bridge. And then you have the dance. So first thing, how do we get to that place where we can accept that? And all I'm going to say to you is, we have to be able to look at the other and say, you are part of the same origin story as I am. We may not see it the same. You may not see it yet that we share this, but we share this. Your humanity and my humanity are part and parcel of the same reality, the same bigger picture. So if you see that, you start over the bridge, and the only thing you take, imagine you're going into another country. The only thing you take is you take a clear plastic bag with your ID in it, just who you are, not all your baggage, not all your anger, not all your frustration. I mean, this experiment that they did with Heineken is amazing, and I'm suspecting, I'd love to go back and see the actual data, I'm suspecting about 20 or 30 couples didn't work out. Because it's hard not to take your baggage all the way across. It's hard not to do that. But that's what we've got to do. That's the second thing we have to do. We really have to let go of that baggage that we carry. Again, I'm not saying give up your fight for justice. You're not trying to fight for justice. You're trying to connect with humanity. That's a different thing. And that's the only thing that's going to change the world. We can go on fighting forever. Even if we win, we'll just be fighting again later on, right? I mean, this is what Martin Luther King was saying when he said, the idea that Jesus is saying you've got to love your enemies seems like the most ridiculous, fanciful, and idealistic thing possible. And then he said, it's the most pragmatic thing we can do to change the world, is to love our enemy. That's weird to get your head around. So you make it. Say you're not taking your baggage across. Say you're not taking your defensiveness across. Say you're taking just this empty bag, this emptiness, saying, I'm going to cross the bridge because I'm a student here and I'm going to learn how to dance. Somebody's going to come at you pretty hard, right? Someone's going to come at you with all of their echo chamber, all of their culture, all of what they don't know. What do you do with that? And you already feel your cackles rising, and you already feel the cortisol racing through your body. Wax on, wax off. You take a deep breath. You let it out. You take another deep breath and you let it out. And so when that woman came at me and she said, that's just wrong. That's just wrong for those people to be like that. I said, yeah, it's weird, isn't it? It's just strange. Does it feel weird to you? And she said, yeah. I said, yeah, it does. Although I said, some of my best friends are lesbians and gays, and my brother and my brother-in-law, and I got to say, they have had some of the longest, most loving relationships of couples I've known anywhere. And I don't always get it. Do you ever have that? Do you have anybody's? I just began to dance instead of defend. I'm not going to go scripture to scripture. That's useless. I'm going to dance with their fear. And you have to let go of your fear in order to do it, to dance with theirs. And I'll tell you what happened is after a while we went back and forth, and she kind of continued to come at it with some other defensive position, and I continued to sort of invite her anxiety. And after a few dancing steps, she changed the subject. And we started talking about family. But she didn't really change the subject because it just went that way naturally. And as we got to talking about family, once again, I brought up my brother again, and she didn't change her mind. I wasn't trying to change her mind. I was trying to introduce her to the human connection that we all have, because that's what we lose in our echo chambers. We lose the number one step, that we are all connected together. So that's what I'm inviting you to do. Now, there's great groups that do this. There's this wonderful nonprofit organization called People's Suppers, where they do they've done 1,200 or more of these kind of things around the country, engaged community in just dialogue and supper, just different individuals from neighborhoods or from communities or through different organizations. They didn't look to see who was opposite each other. They just invited a diverse community and had meals, and they had projects, and then they had discussion. There's lots of models for that. There's models with Brene Brown for courageous conversations. We're going to do some of those. But I don't want to be the one just making all these things happen. I want you to email me. I want you to tell me, I think this is important. I think we need to try to be a part of making a change here, of trying to help people find their humanity. Go ahead and argue your case. I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on. Go ahead and do that. But if you want to join me in helping people connect with their humanity, and to do that across the bridge, then I'd love for you to let me know, because I want to get it started too. The last thing I'd want to say, just real quick, is this. There's the band set up here. It occurred to me, one of my favorite scenes, one of my favorite movies, was Places in the Heart. How many of you saw that movie? I don't want to have to go into too much description. With Sally Fields. And if you saw Sally Fields receive the Academy Award for her role in that thing, you also saw her do this goofy thing which just says, "This means you really like me." And I thought, how appropriate for her to say that in the context of that movie. And the movie, of course, was about the sheriff in town and his wife, Sally Field, and it takes place he was in the Waxahachie areas where he grew up in the Depression era of Texas, but it takes place in somewhere like that. And a young black boy, a young black man is drunk, and the sheriff goes to arrest him, and things get out of hand, and then he gets hold of the pistol, and in an accident, he shoots the sheriff and kills him, and then there's a lynch mob, and it's just ugly and disgusting and horrifying, and that's how the movie starts. And then it just kind of deals with all of the brokenness and the difficulty in relating in community with that kind of reality. And other people are introduced into the story and have this sort of, we realize the world's made up of this diversity of sorrows and sufferings and pains that we all share. And yet we express them in such angry ways because we're not in touch with our humanity. That's really what the movie was about. And when it ends, they're all having communion together in the chapel, right? In the sanctuary. And as you're watching, you're thinking, wait a minute. That guy left town earlier. Why is he back? And then you keep watching and you think, well, there's the sheriff. And then you watch next to him is, well, there's the young boy. And then you look behind him and you go, well, there's some of the folks that were part of the hanging. And they're passing communion to one another. And the children are passing to some of those guys. And it's such a difficult thing to put your head around. But that's the origin story. And until we can see that big picture, there's really no use of even trying to cross the bridge, right? That's where we got to start. Amen.